and welcome to this great event organized by the McGill Black Alumni Association. I'm Antoine Olafo, the Black Student Affairs Liaison under the Plan to Address Anti-Black Racism in the Associate Provost Office. And we're here today to celebrate Black History Month and McGill alumni and author Perry C. Douglas. So he's the founder of Douglas Backwell Incorporated, a company focused on building strategy through intelligence-based research. Perry believes that finding your individuality can fuel your entrepreneurial drive and give you the best shot at success. So we're all aware that there's been a lot of talk recently about AI. Well, for Douglas, it stands for Applied Intelligence. So his book, AI, Applied Intelligence, A Renaissance in New Thinking for Caribbean Prosperity in the 21st Century, offers new thinking grounded in nature and driven by intelligence. It applies to all walks of life, but here Douglas shares its benefits to Caribbean people of African descent and presents a blueprint for the future prosperity of the region. So when Perry approached me, he told me this was not going to be your traditional book launch. Okay? Instead, we talked about his time at McGill and his family, some of which are going to McGill currently, actually. So in my job, I see a lot of Black students and meet with them, and they're very worried about graduation, what's next, the job market, and how to be their authentic self in society after leaving McGill. And Perry wanted to address this with his concepts and with his life experience. So as you can see, today is really going to be an active conversation, and I'm so grateful for our facilitator and general wizard with words, who gracefully joins us today, Ms. Pat Dillon Moore. Her career from the stage to the airways, including our own CKUT, needs no introduction, but I'm not sure if everyone knows she also has known Perry a long time. They both grew up in Côte des Neiges, aka Uptown. So without further ado, I'll just let the conversation begin. Thank you for being here.
Let me make sure this is on. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming, because one of the most important commodities is time. And the mere fact that you've chosen to spend a little bit of your currency with us, I am grateful. Brother. Darling.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right.
So this has been a long time coming. And, I know you very differently. Van Horn School Uptown, Westbound High, and then you came here. How'd you do it?
Interesting. It's a long time ago. Well, first of all, we did go to Van Horn School together. And by the way, when we were in elementary school, she used to bully me. So, just so you guys know.
It worked, right? It worked, right?
And before I start, I want to say thank you very much for allowing me to speak. This is really, really great for me. I do a lot of speaking, client business and all that, but this is something that is true to my heart. And I'm happy my daughter is in McGill, my son went, and my daughter is here, Asia, and I'm so happy that my young daughter is there. And I'm a father, so I have to brag. My daughter actually is the 8-time Canadian National Judo Champion and the Pan American Judo Champion. She's badass, right?
Do you bully him too? We're gonna meet in the back, okay?
So how did I get here? How did I get here? I believe, thank you. I got here from a strong mother, Caribbean background, a family which always pushed education, a family that always pushed you're never a victim, a family that expected performance, or performance is an expectation, and make no excuses. So that's how I got here. My mother, it was the most inspirational part of my life, and I think I played basketball in Montreal, and those of you know, I was a pretty competitive person. So when I was deciding to go to university, it was Concordia or Montreal or McGill. And I have a Concordia buddy here of mine, Dexter, so I hope he doesn't be offended. But my mother's like, no, you're going to McGill. right? You go in for the top. You're smart. You go for the go. So it's not me. It's the culture. It's my parents, my mother. So it's all about aiming high at every stage in your life.
When did you know that big data was it, and that you're going to leave the world of banking? And you had an impressive career in the banking days, if I could refer to it as that. But you latched on to big data and opened your own entity. Was that something that was part of Mummy's dream for you? When did you know?
Yeah, good question. You know, it's one of those things. When I was in the investment business at UBS, right? One of the largest investment banking wealth management firms in the world. And, you know, I had some of Canada's wealthiest families as my clients. I learned that the most important commodity is information and knowledge. And, you know, one of Robert Smith, black billionaire, whose business is essentially in software, right? And he made a comment that intellectual capital is the most important right now. Like knowledge, if you have knowledge and if you exercise your intellectual ability, you can make money. You're gonna need capital, okay, but the first thing is your intellectual ability. So data or data science allowed me to process information at a very quick rate in order for me to use that knowledge to gather insight. And once I gather that insight, I can apply that insight to whatever, you know, entrepreneurial activity that I want to pursue. So the most important commodity in the world right now is data. It's bigger than oil, right? And I think the more we get on to intellectualizing and understanding data and turning data into insight for us to act in our own self-interest is what you really want to be thinking about as students going forward.
Oh, no, you know, Samir, when did you know?
I don't know. I don't
remember,
know.
like, was it here, lugging books, buying books in the bookstore, complaining about the prices of books? Was it in high school? But something there, you had a eureka moment that this is big. And I hear what you're saying about Robert, so it must be around that time. But you sort of have to know, I'm going to throw my all into this.
You know, it's a really hard question because some things happen, right? And some things happen by the process of you being involved in it and searching for information. I've always been a reader, right? I've always been searching for information. I've always been looking at things logically, right? And one thing leads to the other. So one of the things I am is a risk taker, right? I tell people I'm more comfortable taking risk than being a salaried employee, because anybody could walk into me one day and say, hey, that's it, you're off, you get no more job, right? I feel safer as an entrepreneur. It's risky, it's stressful, there's ups and downs, but I do know at the end of the day, I'm a survivor and I can make it based if I apply my intelligence. So this whole applied intelligence sort of naturally came about. And the name implied intelligence in terms of what I was looking to name the company, we were going to name it, you know, Douglas Blackwell, you know, something stupid like algorithms, whatever, right? But it just applied intelligence and then it just kind of morphed from there.
So now, all that reading, history is big for you and what it tells us about human nature.
Yes.
When did that start? Like, were you the nerdy? I don't remember you as the nerdy guy in the...
I was never a nerdy guy. How was I a nerdy guy?
No, your head was too big.
Oh, so he knows me.
Yeah, Yeah, from high school. I know you when you were 7,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you weren't nerdy, but
Yeah.
I don't remember you amongst the quiet ones
Yeah.
behind the book. So
No.
the love of history
Yeah.
and what it tells us about.
Yeah.
When did you get into that?
I was always in love with history. I was, when I was in, even elementary school and high school, I was always watching the news.
Mhm.
And I would always start reading newspapers and I would always start reading books. And, at McGill, one of my majors was history. And, but I really got into history after, I left, even when I was in, my first job, one of my first jobs, RBC Dominion Securities. And then when I moved from RBC to Dominion Securities to UBS, I always read because a lot of times my engagement with clients was because I was kind of well read, and everything is about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Life is about relationships. And for me, I'll give you an example. I was at UBS, I had a huge team. You had the lawyers, you had the FX traders, you had this, and I was a relationship manager. Because at the end of the day, the client is going to have to trust you. And having a broad understanding of different people, different cultures, and history, where you can have an authentic conversation with somebody is very important in the business world. Authentic conversations. And if you can be your authentic selves, people are going to like you. And if people like you, they'll do business with you. Right?
Are there trends in history that you have identified that happen over and over again
Yes.
as part of human nature?
Yes, excellent question. The history of the universe, and a lot of what I have in the book is for people to understand nature. And if you can understand nature and understand the universe, you have an opportunity not only to survive in it, but to thrive in it. So if you look at, let's say what's going on today. We are now in what they call the 5th industrial revolution, right? ChatGPT, OpenAI, all this kind of stuff, right? But this is just another industrial revolution. So, turn of the 20th century, 19th century, you can go back 1,000 years from the agricultural revolutions. Technology has always been the advent of change, the agents of change. So when you go back to history and if you look at the agricultural revolution in terms of how the agricultural revolution was able to create now societies where you can feed your societies, all those things. So the agricultural revolution was just about using tools to farm so we can feed each other and we can grow our societies. So if you look at the Industrial Revolution, what was it? It was technology, able us to mass produce, creating greater standards of living, creating more let's say in Britain, for example, the city of London, people moved from sort of feudal societies into the city of London, and that expanded. And then the electronic revolution in the 60s or whatnot, which was led by the Asian tigers, and now the internet, and now you look at data science and artificial intelligence. Every one of these things are the same. The technology is different, but the use of technology to push the world forward is the same. So history teaches you not to freak out. People are like, OpenAI and all this stuff, oh my God, okay? No, this is the natural evolution of the human species and civilization. If you can understand history, you have a really good chance of being able to to write your playbook in order to succeed in your infinitesimal place in the universe. Because we're only here for like a twinkle, right? If you think about it, right? So by understanding history, you have a real good opportunity in the present going forward.
Power. Let's talk about power. The world is about power. Can we discuss the complexity of current power dynamics and hierarchical structures and behavioral networks? Power.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's what everybody is either confused about. Some of them feel they have it.
Yeah.
Some of it is foolish power.
Yeah.
And then there's real power, the power of the 1%. There's all sorts of things.
So look, the world comes down to power. It's if you have it, you can exercise it. If you don't, you really can't. And people who have money take that money and turn it into power. right? And they have the power to influence political politics, and they have power to influence the justice system, right? So for me, right, one of the things I talk about from the Black experience perspective, right, we have to understand that power moves the universe. And how do you create power? You create power by creating value, okay? How do you create value? It's through economics. Listen, economics is not a morality play. Forget about what your professors tell you, okay? Economics is a power play, okay? And I talk about it in my book. It's a power play. Because when you have economics, you have influence, okay? How do you think politics run? Why is it $500 million to win a US election? Okay, so it comes down to money and power. So from the Black experience, what I say you have to focus on is you have to focus on creating value, and you create value through entrepreneurship. Okay, when you create value through entrepreneurship, you can hire who you want, right? You can fire who you want. You can donate. You can write checks to build your own community organizations or whatnot, and you can wield your power in politics, right? So if you don't create value in the universe, you have nothing to transact with in the universe, okay? If you don't have, everything in life is a trade, okay? Going to my background in investments, everything is a trade. So if you don't have economic value, how are you going to how are you going to, how are you going to trade, or how are you going to create your own value? So if you don't have value, you won't be able to create, come on in guys, don't worry about it, right? You won't be able to have power in the universe. So you have to understand that. And one of the things we do, right, in the Black community too often, and we have to get out of this trap, is the romanticization of racism, okay? Suffering is not something that is natural in nature, okay? Suffering, do not romanticize suffering. Do not romanticize, a lot of that goes back, to Christianity and how it's been used against you. You've been programmed in that way. You shouldn't want to suffer, okay? You should want to be able to live a happy life and be able to use your value and create happiness. And wealth is how, when we get to the sophistication of self-preservation, well, everybody since tribal days, since hunter-gatherer societies, right? It was always about the accumulation of something in order for you to survive and create wealth, and to use that wealth to create your security. Because wealth is a form of creation of security. And once you create that security, okay, you create your value, okay, and then you create your power in the universe. So what we have to do is we have to stop with the romanticization of suffering and focus on, on our economics and building our economics through entrepreneurship. And if we can do that, we have a chance. Because that's the only way you're going to survive. And there's no guarantee as a society, okay, or as a species, we will be here 100 years from now. Okay, and history tells us that, and there's many examples of that. So remember, without value, okay, you don't have any power, no matter what anybody tells you.
Suppose I don't want to be wealthy, or is wealth a relative term? And they throw around these terms like generational wealth. Suppose I'm quite good to just be able to buy a little pack of rice. Nobody.
Yeah.
True,
Yeah.
I've never been wealthy, but then I sort of imagine when you have this much wealth at this level, the stress to keep it.
Yeah.
Wondering who coming to rob you,
Yeah.
how many of those people are really enjoying it.
Yeah.
Do I have to be happy, be wealthy?
So the ultimate place for me, in terms of how I see the world, is your individualism, your personal freedom, your ability to do what you want, okay? So individualism is, to me, where I think you need to go. You need to express yourself, and you need to express your individualism in the universe, okay? Now, having said that, the reality also is, okay, in the human condition, we have to satisfy a certain amount of needs in the human condition. The number one need in the human condition is security, okay? Have a roof over your head, being able to feed your kids, being able to do that. And the only way you're gonna do that to satisfy the innate human condition is through, you need money in the world to live, right? The other big thing as a people, we complain about, you know, we don't have this, we don't have that. Well, how do you think people, okay, for example, like how do you think, you know, people get into the best schools or they get the best jobs, the best opportunity? It's intergenerational wealth. And what intergenerational wealth does, it creates intergenerational opportunity, right? So for example, you know, privilege is a function of wealth, and it's a function of power, and it's a function of exercising that power to move your kids forward. So at the same time, we can't complain and say, hey, you know what, we want this, we want that, we wanted this, what, and what. We can't ask the what, like we're gonna ask the government for it? No, we gotta create it ourselves, okay? So my mother, you know, came from the Caribbean, you know, and I'm sure many friends of mine here, we have the same experience. Came here, worked hard, did all these things. I figured out how to get, you know, into McGill and all that kind of stuff because she laid something into me in terms of how to succeed. So she gave me that. I've been able to graduate, you know, from McGill. My brother is an MBA, you know, and you know he's doing okay. And our kids now are the intergenerational benefactors of that, right? So I have 3 kids. The first one went to you know, Ryerson. The second son at McGill, and my daughter who's sitting here went to McGill. Is going to McGill. But so why is she going there? 2 is because it wasn't very hard to get in here. Yes, you have to have all the grades, but because from an early age I was able to explain to her, you know, choosing the right school, doing these things, and even in final year trying to get into McGill, she had to get these math marks at a certain level, right? So we hired a tutor. I hired a tutor to help her.
And wealth enables.
And wealth enables that. Middle class income, wealth enables that. There's some black kids who it's not about intelligence, it's about opportunity. And wealth allows you to create your opportunity. You know, not saying my daughter wouldn't have gotten the, you know, the 90s in math, but the tutor helped her, and I was able to weekly pay for those tutors. And in Toronto, those tutors are expensive. Like tutors are here $40. Toronto is $80. It's a rip-off, but anyway, it's a whole other story. But the fact is, that wealth has given my daughter an advantage. And to me, you have to understand that's how the world works. Don't complain, okay? Understand your situation and play the cards you're dealt and move forward. Because if you complain, ain't nobody gonna listen anyways, and no one's gonna care. Nobody cares. Let me explain to you. In the world, guys, you're in the university now, or, you know, you're doing all these beautiful things. When you step out in the real world, nobody gives a damn. Nobody gives a damn about you. You have to figure shit out yourself. Okay? And the sooner you realize that, the better opportunity you're gonna have. For me, you know, when I worked at RBC, or I worked at UBS. So let's look at UBS. One of the oldest, biggest firm in the world, wealth management investment bank, Union Bank of Switzerland, biggest firm. I'm the only black guy in the firm, right? In the whole of Canada. And in 2008, I was the #1 guy in Canada on the all-factor rankings. If I thought for a minute I wasn't deserving of that, if I thought for a minute I couldn't achieve that, if I thought for a minute I was a victim, I never would have gotten there. All right? So you have to understand, if you want to succeed, it's how you think. And if you do not get with your thinking as soon as you can, and if you do not start to intellectualize yourself and move away from emotion, emotional thinking, forget about it, okay? You have to be able to apply intelligence. And for me, applying intelligence is looking at a situation and apply thinking to figure out how best you're gonna get there.
This past Saturday, Toni Morrison, and I want to leave just a couple moments, because she's an ancestor. Toni would have been 92 this past Saturday. Her lifelong work has had such an impact on you. Tell me about the journey you took going through Toni Morrison's book, and also I know you up there in your heart and your intellect, is Angela Davies.
Mhm.
What did you learn
Yeah.
from being in their company through their books?
Yeah. So I also, I appreciate that question. I actually posted something about Toni Morrison and Angela Davis today. One of the things we have, one of the issues we have in the Black community too is we don't appreciate the women, the intellectual impact that women have had, specifically in the 60s and the 70s and today. So Toni Morrison and Angela Davis, I'm gonna use them as an example, okay, of intellectual capacity and impact. And I'm gonna put Angela Davis here, okay? And I'm gonna put Toni Morrison and Angela Davis together. I'm gonna put Malcolm X, and I'm gonna put Martin Luther King here. Now, before I say that, I was gonna say, people are gonna say, oh, Harry's is not putting Malcolm X and Martin Luther King here. You know, he's like, how could he? It's sacrilege. No, take a deep breath and let's get into an intellectual understanding of what I'm talking about. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, their impact is highly emotional. Okay, it's a highly emotional sell. Martin Luther King says it's all about faith, all about Christianity, right? I have a dream speech, okay? All good stuff, but I have a dream. That's not reality. That dream is not gonna work, okay? It's not gonna work. Malcolm X, all that stuff. It captured our emotion, and we have been led by emotion all this time. Angela Davis, Toni Morrison. If you read these two women, these are intellectual heavyweights. They broke down the problem for you. Toni Morrison called racism a fraud. Racism is a distraction. Racism distracts you from doing the work, okay? Because racism is a construct, okay? Racism is a construct for those who need to use it from an economic perspective. Okay, what do you think slavery was, right? Slavery was an economic construct and what happened, it was an economic construct for the expansion of Europe. It was much easier from a human resources to use slaves because a slave was more valuable than gold, right? Okay, a slave could go on and on and on, but gold, you know, that's it. So slavery was an economic construct. And then the church, okay, Christianity came in, okay, and used the Bible, okay, to say black people are here, white people are here, okay, and it created a construct. So it had to teach us, it had to tell us that, you know, we were inferior and white race was superior in order for slavery to work. What Toni Morrison has been able to explain to us, get that out of your head, because what it has you do is explain it over and over again, your existence in the universe. It allows us to run around romanticizing racism for every single day to you know, justify our existence, give reasons. Oh, we had no history. Oh, now we got Black History Month. We got all these different things. But while the rest of the world is moving forward, okay? So we romanticize stuff as a distraction. So in terms of, you know, can't get too much into that, but in terms of Angela Davis and Toni Morrison was a fictional author, okay? And what she did is she made racism real. You know, the Blue-Eyed first one, and then Beloved, which she's a Pulitzer Prize winner, and she's a Nobel Prize winner, okay? But her intellectual ability to explain race, okay, and what you should and shouldn't do was exquisite. Angela Davis was another one. Angela Davis was able to explain, she was a philosopher, explain race, okay? As a feminist, she was able to use her feminist ability and understanding in terms of the treatment of women, and in terms of the treatment of black women. Those are the important issues. Those are intellectual issues. Those are the things that are going to help you, Okay, again, nothing against Malcolm and Martin, but I want you to understand the intellectual ability and the weight of these two women. So what I'm trying to say to you here, try to move with intellectual ability as opposed to emotion, because the intellectual ability is what's going to make you move forward. And if you go back, when listen, the guy back 1,000,000 years ago, the guy running, or 500,000 years ago, the guy running through the plains of Africa, he had to figure out how to make a spear to kill the flipping lion or kill his food. And that didn't take emotion, that took intellect. Okay? So we have to understand what nature is. Okay? And we have to be able to separate our emotion and be able to use our intellect, because it's our intellect that advances us, not our emotion. And my argument is that the black folks, we have been too emotional. Okay, we rely on emotion too much. We romanticize suffering. We romanticize racism. Okay, and we don't put enough of our ability into intellectualizing our situation.
But we're emotional creatures.
That's more reason why you have to use intellect to govern you, right? Because if you're an emotional creature, you just do everything emotional, right? Freud said it, you got the id, ego, and superego, and you got to manage that, right? You can't just be, like, you just can't go. People who, history has proven, people who are super emotional and do things that don't succeed, is the people who use the intellectual capacity that succeed. It's as simple as that.
Is there a way whereby I make choices, and depending on the choices I make, I can reach for an intellectual critical thinking approach, and where it serves me, use emotional thinking? Is it one or the other is what I'm asking?
No, nothing is binary. Emotional intelligence is super important, but intelligence allows you to decide when to use it and when not to use it. That's the thing, right? So you have to, listen, my daughter will tell you, if I try to use this emotional intelligence stuff with my wife, it's an all-go, right? So in relationships, it might not be a good idea, okay? But all seriousness, no, you gotta govern yourself.
As a man, when you see some of the things that make up personal responsibility, and I want you perhaps to go on your emotional side a bit for me.
Personal responsibility
as a man, because we have some pretty intellectual men out there. So
I mean, personal responsibility is just what it is. Personal responsibility. You have to be responsible for yourself. You have to be responsible for your family. You have to have an attitude of, no matter what happens to me, it's my fault. Okay, I'm responsible for that. If something happens to you and it's your fault, or if it's not your fault, you still got to deal with it. Right? So personal responsibility is making sure you take care of your responsibility. The government is, you're not going to rely on the government. You're not going to rely on somebody else. You got to rely on yourself. It is your personal responsibility to make your way through in life, and the people who are important to you, and the people who you love, you have a personal responsibility to take care of them. So for me, listen, it's about personal responsibility, accountability, right? And taking, just taking the personal responsibility for your own life. One of the things I want to make clear, I'm not here to tell anybody how to live their life. I'm not here to tell anybody what to believe in, okay? That's so above my pay grade. All I'm here to tell you is that there's an efficient way of thinking that will help you thrive in the universe. And if you can employ a more efficient way of thinking, a more intellectualized way of thinking, that might help you have a more competitive advantage and find a way to happiness in the world, right? That's what I'm here.
Your individual choice of what will make you happy.
Everything is, most important thing, I do not, and those who know me, I'm not a follower of the rules. I am not, when I say I'm not a follower of the rules, what I mean by that is society doesn't dictate how I think and behave and understand. I do that. Because for me, the most important thing in life is my individuality. And I tell my kids that, express your individuality, okay? Don't, just because society tells you this, why would you do it? Because if it's like, you have to question things, and things change only when people start questioning things, right? People do things a particular way until somebody does it another way, and then that's the new way, right? So for me, it's about, you know, expressing your individuality, and I think that's the true way to happiness. And you know, one of the things I think is important, right? And you know, I tell my daughters all the time, math, okay? Math explains nature, okay? Now what I mean by that is I don't mean sitting there doing equations. If you can understand math, and you could, and I have a chapter in my book, quantitative thinking, if you could break things down mathematically, less stress, okay? Okay, more logical decision. Math is the only thing that explains the universe. And nature is math. Everything is math, okay? So if you could think in a mathematical way, you're just gonna be less emotional, right? So I'm not trying to, for example, you know, like, how do you solve problems? I mean, I'm not here to give a math lecture. I'm not a math guy in terms of whatever, but, you know, math is okay, right? So it's like in calculus. How do you solve a problem? You know, you solve small problems along the way, and you prove it, and then you get to the end. You can't solve a problem from starting here and going to the end. You have to go in increments, and then you know you're right, you know you're right, you know you're right, you keep moving, right? That's logic, okay? And that's a better way of solving problems. So all I'm just trying to say is just think a little bit more mathematically and remove that emotion, okay? Or manage your emotion is might be a better word.
There is the individuality and collective responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the black uplift.
Mm-hmm.
The black uplift has to be then rooted in some sort of critical thinking
Yeah.
for you as an individual and us as a community.
Yeah.
Specifically for all of us here, we're adults and students.
Mm-hmm.
Let us discuss then the sophistication of self-preservation. When I heard that, the sophistication of self-preservation, where you get that term from, Sam? Come with me, good. Come with me. I speak 3 languages, English, French, Patois. How where you get that one from, bro?
Boy, you know, the beautiful thing about writing is like art, right? My daughter calls me a nerd all the time, but when I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone. Writing is like art. And the more you write and the more you discover, right? And then you realize what you're writing, and then I'm trying to explain nature in the book, and I'm trying to explain to people, you know, what it is. And the sophistication of self-preservation is entrepreneurship, because in every single factor in life, from tribal societies, you have to be entrepreneurial and you have to be innovative in order to have an advantage and to keep going. So what I'm trying to say is that we as humans in nature, okay, we have the will to survive. We have the want to survive, to stay alive and to survive and to eat and to figure it out. But in order for us to survive and thrive and move forward, we have to sophisticate our self-preservation. We have a natural self-preservation ability. So you have to sophisticate that in order to continue to move forward. You got to think more. You got to be more innovative. You got to be more creative. Okay? You got to kill and eat. Well, you have to create stone tools, right? And we don't give enough understanding of history into tribal societies and from how we moved to sedentary society. How did we survive? Well, how did we create a more domesticated society? How did we create and feed population? We had to domesticate animals. We had to, create animals that we can eat. We had to farm. All that stuff is the sophistication of our self-preservation, because we need to eat to survive. But how do we do it? We have to sophisticate ourselves. So the sophisticated self-preservation is just something that, hey, sophisticated self-preservation. And then one of the guys who reviewed my book, Dr. Morgan, he's like, wow, this is great. But that's really all it is. And to me, one of the things I don't do in my writing is I don't put things out there, and because you don't put things out there and then try to go and then, justify it or whatnot. To me, writing is also a process of discovery. And when you're writing, it has to make sense. It has, and the dots have to connect. So we have to be able to understand the sophistication of self-preservation, understand the different steps to take in order to survive in the universe. Because you know what? Whether you like it or not, okay, life is about winning. Okay? Don't let anybody tell you it's not. It is about winning. Because if you win, okay, you have, and when I say win, let me just be clear. It doesn't mean you gotta go out there and claim territory and claim it. It's about, like, in order to create the generational wealth, in order to create, so we always talk about it, like, we want generational wealth. Well, then how are you gonna do it? How are you gonna do it? You gotta win, right? You gotta win. So stop with the fantasy about you want all these wonderful things, but you don't want to go out and win it. Do the work.
Do the work.
You got to do the work, right? You got to do the work, and it's nobody else's fault. It's not the white guy's fault. It's not the yellow guy's fault. It's up to you.
Are we too rooted in the white gaze?
Yes. Well, we're too rooted in what I call blaming other people for let's be honest, blaming other people for our predicament.
Is it blame at all? Is it blame, or it is what it is? Keep it moving. Focus, do your thing. I mean, earlier you mentioned playbook.
Mm-hmm.
Find the things in your playbook that is going to propel you forward,
Yeah.
or we just need to blame other people.
Well, you know, it's not maybe blaming other people, but it's just being distracted. Focus on yourself. Focus, like, what is being angry at another group of people? Or, demeaning another group, or trying to put yourself up by putting another group of people down. How does that help us? Right? One of the movies I saw the other day, I bring this up, aggravated me terribly. Have you seen that movie, Those People, on Netflix? Come on, you guys must have seen Those People.
Go with Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy, and what's the other guy's name?
Seth Rogen.
Not Seth Rogen. Jonah Hill.
Jonah Hill, thanks.
Okay. So I watched the movie, I had to turn it off. I was so mad, I never actually went online and said something. I've never, this movie sucks, it's stupid, it's ignorant. Right? And this movie is very harmful to black people. Because here's one of the things. There was a scene at the table, and Eddie Murphy was talking about Farrakhan, and they said something about a boat. And Eddie Murphy said, we black people don't like boats. We don't like boats. So Elaine, I call her Elaine, the mother now, who's Jewish, said, it's like how Jewish people don't like trains. Right? Okay, you know what that means, right? So, Eddie Murphy says now, are you comparing us? Are you comparing our suffering to your suffering? Right? So, hold on a second. You came over here in a boat and slave. These people were sent to the gas chamber on trains. You don't think that is suffering? Right? You don't think Jewish people have suffered? What are you saying? How ignorant is that? Right? They've suffered for 2,000 goddamn years. Right? So stop trying to compare your suffering against somebody else's suffering. Why are you blaming them? They suffered too. Okay? But they're successful. So why are you mad at them? Because they're successful? They suffered for 2,000 years and they said, enough of this shit, we're not taking this shit anymore. They're going to do their thing. Right? So how does that, they went to the gas chambers on trains. You came over here on slave ships.
Suffering is suffering.
Suffering is suffering, and their suffering is their suffering, and your suffering is your suffering. Okay? So what you have to do now is focus on yourself. Don't be mad at anybody else, and don't compare suffering. It's stupid. Okay? So what I mean by that is we get distracted. Right? We get distracted too much. Have personal responsibility yourself and stop blaming others.
Is there a mental health component in the sophistication of self-preservation?
So, I have a chapter called Quantitative Thinking and the Racial Disorder. And mental health is a very important part of performance. If we don't have good mental health, okay, we are going to be underperformers in our lives. Mental health is a very important thing. And you have to really focus on your mental health, and you have to take your mental health very serious. Because if you're not in good mental condition, you're not going to survive. Because a whole bunch of stuff. So when we talk about it today, mental health is your number one priority. If you're in good mental health, and if you're in good mental condition, you can thrive. If you're not in good mental health, you're not taking care of your mental health, you're not taking care of yourself, okay, you're not going to thrive. Okay? And then what happens now, racism in itself can become a disorder. Because now you're going to let all these things come into your mind, and you're going to use race, and you're going to use racism as an excuse. Okay? So mental health, I cover that, I call it the disorder of racism. I go through the information and the data. But yes, I do believe, I'm a strong advocate of mental health.
So, suffering from ethnic battle fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of want to say, there's only so much blinders you can have on. You're running your race, but something gets you, whether you're not eating correctly, or you're not sleeping enough, or stress is lethal. Something somewhere, you're trying your very, very best, your mental health goes. Do you ignore racism altogether?
Well, if you go back to what Toni Morrison said again, racism is a construct, right? Like, we're all one race. We're all like, listen, let's, okay, I know there's a scientist here in the room, I spoke to her earlier, okay? All life started in Africa, East Africa and Southern Africa, okay? And all Homo erectus from all fours, okay, Homo erectus walked out of Africa, Homo sapiens, okay, and walked throughout the world. You all race start, that's why you can have people in Africa with blue eyes, okay? This racism was a construct for economics. And racism was, the whole thing about race started by the Spanish guy when the Spanish started the slave trade. You needed a justification, okay, for slavery, okay? So this is how this whole thing about racism showed up. Listen, we're all tribes, okay? We're all different tribes here, okay? And one tribe is going to protect, again, hunter-gatherer days. Each tribe will protect their territory and fight
their own.
And their what?
And their own.
And their own. That's all we do. I'm protecting my family, and you're protecting people who are familiar to you. So this thing about racism, okay? All right, it's a construct in your head. We are the human race, okay? And this is science, okay? So, if you want to argue against science, then go ahead. But we are one race. Racism is a construct. And if you allow racism so one of the things I want to tell, I think what I was telling Antoine, okay, you students coming out, when you're, I remember when I was at McGill, it was a Black Student Network and all that. I remember there was this one guy, his last name was Douglas too, and he was like heavy, and I was kind of different because I didn't see the world this way. I want to tell Black students, you have no personal responsibility to save the world, save the Black race. You have no, sorry, I don't use that word. You have no personal responsibility to be an activist. Your personal responsibility is to yourself. Read Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. Okay? If you are successful, if you focus on your self-interest, if you focus on your individualism and you focus on creating your own wealth, okay, now you can have power and money, okay, to be an activist, to be philanthropic, okay? But if you don't put your mask on first, you're just going to be wasting time. You have no, students, black, white, red, green, yellow, whatever. You come out and take care of yourself. and make your way through the world. You don't have a personal responsibility to anybody else. Your personal responsibility to your ancestors maybe is that they came over here in slave ships, they had all that suffering, don't waste it. Okay? Take care of yourself, and when you have an opportunity to do better, okay, and to help others, then help others. Be generous. Have empathy. Do all those things. But if you go out there thinking you're going to be an activist, no, you're just going to burn. Okay? But help yourself first, then you can help others.
Let's go to the Caribbean. You see a way forward for the region whereby collectively or individual islands, whether they study their environment or the perils that are going on with respect to the environment, but the region can be as strong as a place like Singapore. Should all of us in North America get up and left this place and head over there?
No, here's how it's done. Again, everything goes back to history. So Singapore is another British colony, right? And after, independence and the British left, Singapore came up with a plan on how Singapore had no natural resources, zero. They have zero. At least in the Caribbean, you have some natural resources. Singapore had nothing. So Singapore is able to develop a plan, okay, where government worked, created, government-owned enterprises, and it was basically entrepreneurs and innovation. But they came up with a plan, and they came up with a strategy, and they executed it. The Caribbean right now can do the same thing, because it's all about leadership, right? It's all about leadership. It's what you think you can do, and then you can apply it. This is the whole thing about applied intelligence. Why is people in Singapore are smarter than people in the Caribbean? Of course not. We're all the same. We all have the same access to the same information. It's what we decide to do with it. The issue right now, from a development perspective in the Caribbean, okay, it's top-down development. It's run by the UN, the IMF, okay, all those institutions. And what happens is these consultants come in and they make the money, and they're telling the Caribbean what to do. And they're coming with their own projects. But those projects are really for an expansion of US markets, because they want them to buy the different products and have an expansion in that market. So what has to be my strategy, what I'm doing right now, working with a client in the Caribbean country, and we're developing a fund, basically a hedge fund. So trying to get $500 million. So this particular hedge fund will look for opportunities in what I call, I've developed, it's competitive markets, your competitive advantage. I don't want to get too technical here, but what is your competitive advantage? For you to be able to win and succeed, you have to first look at your competitive advantage. So in the Caribbean, your competitive advantage is agriculture, okay? So it's not tourism, because tourism does not create any wealth. Tourism does not create a middle-class society, which is what you need. Every society needs a middle-class society in order for it to grow and sustain, okay? So what has to happen in the Caribbean now is that you have to, let's use agriculture. The problem with agriculture now is you can't compete against places like in India or Brazil or California.
Monsanto.
Monsanto is the manufacturer, but the point is these are big land areas. So you can't compete with them in terms of commodity farming, okay? But what you can do now, the hottest thing in the world is now ag tech, okay? The world, from a supply chain perspective, we are now, food is one of the things by the year 2050, we are gonna have a food shortage, right? So what I'm saying here is basically, you use agriculture and you use technology, and farming now goes indoor. Vertical farming, everything can be done indoor. Like if you go in southern Ontario now, the biggest tomato farmer is an indoor farm, acres and acres and acres of indoor, because you can control the environment, okay? You can control the farm, and you know exactly when these plants are gonna grow. And the Caribbean has an advantage in terms of indoor farming, where it doesn't have to pay for energy because it's warm all year round. Okay, so while the indoor farms in Ontario in the wintertime, they're blasting them in energy costs, so that's a negative, okay? But in the Caribbean, there's no heating costs. Plus, where you are in geography is your advantage. Where you are in the equator, you have 7 hours of solar sunlight a day. So you can make solar energy, okay? You can make solar energy in the course of the day and use the sunlight to grow, store that energy in batteries, okay? And you can even double shift and grow at night. It's all about technology. Look at, I'll give you an example, Israel. Israel is a tiny territory. But Israel is the #1 exporter, okay, of fruits and vegetables to Europe. How's that? Indoor farming. Israel feeds itself and is #1 exporter to Europe. All indoor farming. Israel's a desert now, remember that, right? Okay? But how is Israel, how did they use innovation and technology? Okay, Israel's not going to sit there and, oh my God, you know, we're surrounded and we're not going to do anything. Okay? That's not how they think. They're never a victim. They never think like victims. Okay? And they figured it out, and they're the #1 supplier of fruits and vegetables to Europe.
I want to jump in.
Yeah.
So I want to touch the environment.
Yes.
And it's a far off. I'm taking it out of the
Yeah, no
I mean, I only have 2 more questions, and then I'm going to let you guide murder. Right? My own bullying, I can't.
She can't
stop. I can't stop. Today is Carnival Tuesday in Trinidad. For those of us who follow it, or it's a way of life. And throughout all the build-up, I noticed at night everybody wearing coat. I saw one woman wearing a turtleneck to do the reportage over Panorama. And I was startled by it. I called the family, and they said, yeah, man, well, they say it in a Jamaican accent, that's the Trini family now, and don't ask me to do the accent. The evenings have gotten very cool. So it made me go, my God, over there, this climate change thing,
It's real.
It's real. So you're talking about perhaps agriculture, and it's warm. Let's talk about the threat of climate change and the Caribbean.
Yeah. Climate change is the biggest existential threat to the Caribbean and us as a species. Okay? Let's go through the facts. Okay, let's just, all science here. Okay? So, in the book, I have a section on climate change and the threat of the extinction of the black species in the Caribbean within the next 75 to 125 years. All science. So let me break down the science to you. The UN predicts that by 2050, there will be 400 million people migrating due to climate change. If you look at it right now, the 2 areas in the world that is the greatest threat to climate change is the South Pacific, which has already fallen on the water. If you follow that, the Pacific Islands, and the Caribbean, underwater. These are small territories. Maybe Jamaica will be a little safer because it's bigger.
Hi, hello.
But let me give you some real world. So 400 million people. So out of the 400 million people, you got to think the Caribbean has about 18 million. So a high probability, right, based on math, that the Caribbean will be underwater within 50 to 100 years based on where climate change is right now, based on the UN models and predictions. Okay? That's a science. Let me give you some, let me give you some actual experience. So when I bring my kids back to Grenada, I haven't been back in a while, I brought them to a beach called Grand Anse Beach. It's a world famous beach. And I said when I was younger, okay, or even 30 years ago, I remember when I went back, my grandmother was passed, before my grandmother passed away, when I was at McGill, I went to see her before she died. And the beach was 25, so from a young boy to now, the beach is 25 to 30 feet closer. Okay, and there was this one hotel there. Okay, my friend of mine's hotel. And he says sometimes when you get a wave, it goes right into the room. So sometimes he can't sell those rooms. So the water has come from when I was a boy, or even 30 years ago, water has moved 25 feet. The islands are going underwater. If you go to Guyana, Guyana now is predicted as one of the top 10 areas, Guyana, Georgetown, Guyana, which will be underwater in 8 years.
Hold on, what?
Guyana.
8?
8 years. 8 years. Okay? Just read the reports. Guyana will be underwater in 8 years. And what Guyana is doing now is trying to put up seawalls and all these type of things. So climate change is real. Okay? And we have to understand that this is one of the biggest threats to the Caribbean species, because history tells us that societies change because of climate change. So if you look at, let me give you one example. If you look at the Mongol Empire, right? 1266 to 13 something. That was the Mongol Empire. They'll tell you the Roman Empire, but it's the Mongol Empire that created the modern world. Eurasia, the Mongols are the ones who created St. Petersburg and Russia and all that kind of stuff. So if you look at Eurasia, Asia, Europe, what's connected there, there used to be a piece of green land which is called the steppe. Okay, so the Mongols were able to take territory and defeat people because they were nomads, right? And they could pick up and move. They could farm anywhere in the steppe. But when climate change happened, that nice land essentially disappeared due to climate change, and that was one of the major reasons, if not the biggest reasons, why the Mongol Empire fell when they did, I believe, in 1326. Don't quote me on that particular thing. Historically, if you go through everything, climate change has always been changing, okay? Change in society. So the reality for the Caribbean, this is where I'm going here. For the Caribbean, climate change is real. So what I say, and I modeled out in the book, okay? I don't give predictions, and this isn't because I hate it because you look stupid, but I'm just following the science. So if you follow the science of climate change, that means we will have Caribbean refugees, right? You see the refugees coming out of Africa, Middle East, or wherever it is. We will have Caribbean refugees in 50 to how many years, okay? Where are they gonna go? They're not gonna come to Canada or Europe. You know the history of that. If you see how they treat the difference between an Afghan refugee compared to Ukraine refugee. Ukrainians, come on over, no problem. The Afghans, because of darker skin, how's that working out, right? So what you're gonna have is you're gonna have Caribbean refugees, okay, either going to be put on boats and, they could show up in a port in Miami, they're gonna turn them back, okay? So what I'm saying is that if you do not create wealth, okay, in the Caribbean, okay, Grenada has 95,000 people. It's not a lot of people. If you don't create wealth, okay, you're not going to be able to immigrate to any of these countries around the world, because if you want to immigrate and you have a job, you have a skill, you have wealth, they'll take you. Canada will take you, right? Any country. If you don't have wealth, we can't afford to take you. So you're going to have Caribbean refugees. That's a fact based on science. And don't tell me, okay, that they're going to say, oh no, a humanitarian. That's never happened. We're not humanitarian. World War II, when a whole bunch of Jews came over on a boat, escaping Poland, before Hitler drove in, what did Canada do? Check your history. Sent them back. Didn't let them off the boat. So we have a history, okay? There's no compassion. So unless you have money to bring, to take and to move and to immigrate, like in Toronto, like, let's say Chinese people are coming over and they're buying houses and they're helping my neighborhood. Come on in. They're helping up my property. They're bringing up my property value. That's great. I like that. Okay? I'm human. I'm going to be honest. I like that. People are not going to allow you to come over if you do not present any value to their society. The sophistication of self-preservation. So unless you create wealth and economics, when these islands start sinking into the ocean, you're going to become a refugee.
Or here, powerless to save them.
Or powerless to save them.
Just the science. I have my last question. So if we get by following your logic, if we just sit down and fight racism all the time, and I'm looking at myself, I'm middle-aged now, I marched up and down from the first time they did kill Anthony Griffin, and it's looking like just now I have to go start march again. Poor Diku was killed on the 24th of December, and 30-something years later, with my little arthritis self, I have to march again. George Floyd's death, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Marcellus Francois, everybody, all of it. We now have a woke industry, and I want to briefly touch this. The other side of the woke industry is anti-racist behavior. If we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing in our way, and I'm a Caribbean woman, I want to do what I can, so if Caribbean people need me, I'm going to help them out, or get my uncles and cousins out and so forth, right? My tribe, because your tribe take care of your tribe, I'm listening to him. But if I'm busy here being woke, and then creating all this ill will and bad feeling, where do you see it all going?
So the key word that you said is woke. Woke industry. People are making livings off suffering. And after George Floyd, every group has come up and created nonprofit organizations to do this and do that. Woke has become an industry. Suffering has become an industry. I don't have a problem.
Are we capitalizing off that?
And people are capitalizing.
No, me, black person capitalizing.
No, you're not capitalizing. You're not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about individuals, okay, who create an industry of wokeness. Well, what has it done? The question has to be this: how is it being useful to black people? How has it helped black people? Since George Floyd, everybody has come up with this woke this, woke that, critical race theory, all these things. My question is, how has it helped black people? Has it advanced you? While others make an industry and make a living off it, has it advanced? To me, applied intelligence is this. If it's useful to you and it can help you and it can help you advance, then what I'm trying to do is helpful. If something is not helpful, why are you doing to it? It falls into the same trap of the romanticization of racism.
Or victimhood.
Or victimhood. Okay? And we fall into that trap all the time. Wokeism is an industry. Now I wrote an article which was called the West Hall article there, Winter is Coming.
It's cold.
Winter is Coming, the peril of the Black North. Okay? So there's a guy in Toronto who I know, wealthy, multi-billionaire black guy. I know him well. We've done business together. So after George Floyd, he's created an organization called the Black North. Really, he just created it to show himself off. Oh, look at me, I'm a rich black guy. Do as I do, or blah blah blah. But he's not useful to people. People have used wokeism to fill their egos. It hasn't helped them. Okay? What you need to focus on is the sophistication of self-preservation, creating value, creating wealth for yourself so you can help yourself. Right? Tell me, since George Floyd, what has changed? What has changed? Right? Republicans, the GOP just trying to, crush you more? They're not going to change. They're not going to change. And who cares about it? If you're worried about Trump supporters, dumb as hell, you should be happy that you're dealing with people, Trump supporters, as dumb as hell. They're not the ones you got to be worried about. The ones you got to be worried about are not the Trump supporters. The ones you got to be worried about who are the ones in the corporate offices and whatnot who are not stupid enough to be like Trump, right? That's not who you have to worry about. So this whole wokeism industry, this whole critical race theory thing, okay, is counterproductive to you, okay? Because again, you cannot help yourself by trying to make other people feel bad or other people feel guilty. And I don't really want to get into this critical race theory thing, but I want to get into it because history, I'm not saying you shouldn't be teaching history, okay, or black history, of course not. American history is black history. Focus on that. But when you start creating an agenda out of history, then people start fighting back. Tribalism, okay? People are protecting their own, okay? And then guess what? No matter how hard you fight, ain't nobody gonna give up their privilege. Ain't nobody. Do you know who's gonna, am I gonna give up my privilege, my wealth for somebody else? No, it's for my kids. The person sitting right in front there, to make sure she has all the advantages in the world. It's human nature, okay? Forget about racism. It's human nature. People protect and take care of their own. It's nature. And if you understand nature, okay, you have a better opportunity to survive in the world. So what I try to do in the book, I try to run you through how the universe really works. And speaking of books, I brought 2 books here that I think you must read. If you're a university student, before you leave, it must be mandatory reading. I'm trying to get her to read it, but she hasn't read it yet. But Why Nations Fail. The Origins of Power, Prosperity, and Poverty. It's an MIT professor and a Harvard professor. This is a survey of the last 2,000 years, and if you read this, you will understand how power, poverty, and inequality happens. You've got to read it. Can't be listening to TikTok and Facebook and all that. You ain't gonna learn anything there. Okay, you got to read it. The second book, another Harvard professor guy, The Swerve, How the World Became Modern. And what you're gonna learn from this book is how life is so random. Life is random. Okay? Life is random. So this book, okay, so basically in 1417, right, this monk went and searched some of the monasteries for papers from the Roman Empire, some of these Stoics. So Lutherus wrote something called On the Nature of Things. Okay? So what he found was a poem. Okay? And what the poem essentially showed is that before then, everything was about Christianity. You explain the universe to Christianity. You explain the universe to God. Everything is God. Oh, how did this happen? Oh, God. How did this happen? Oh, God. Okay? Everything was about Christianity and God. What brought in the Enlightenment period was the fact that back in 490 BC or whatever, the Greek philosopher, Roman philosopher, he talked about nature. We are just atoms. Okay? We are atoms in space and time in the universe. That's all we are. We are matter. We are matter. We're just matter. Okay? And space and time. That's all we are. And we only here for a little bit. Okay? That's who we are. We don't have, there's nothing predetermined. The universe doesn't know us. The universe doesn't care about us. We're just atoms. So back then, when this guy was talking about the nature of things, how nature works, we're just atoms. Okay? We're colliding in the universe. That's all we are. So then they got to realize that, hey, this science thing might be important. And that's sort of how the Enlightenment period. So, I'm not doing this book justice, but I just think The Swerve, how the world became modern, you will understand how science came to dominate. And this is my whole point of intellectualization of yourselves, because it was the intellectual ability for people to have this renaissance in history and science and mathematics. And this is what I'm calling for in the Caribbean. We need to have a renaissance in our thinking and remove ourselves from the emotional thinking to the intellectual thinking. And if we can move from emotion to intellect, we have a better chance of not only surviving, but thriving in the universe. Right? So I highly, I don't usually bring books, but I think Why Nations Fail, you'll understand this, and The Swerve, it's beautiful. I mean, the guy won the Pulitzer Prize for it, but like, you'd sit, oh yeah, okay, now I understand.
I guess you would find yourself in, perhaps.
Yeah, right?
Students, for an hour and 15 minutes, he's taken his wisdom and give it to you this way. He didn't even put the sugar on the medicine. Give it to you straight. That must have been the Côte d'Ivoire uptown upbringing.
NDG, by the way.
Which NDG? You used to live on Linton.
No, I never lived on Linton. The Cary. Age, sorry. Go ahead.
Can you see why I used to beat him? We're thinkers here. I want you to take the opportunity, hit him with whatever question. All of that was coming from a place of love?
Of course.
Please put your hands together for Aries. Antoine, are you going to help us with the mic? There's a mic. Now listen, you can hear.
Oh.
Here's the thing I'm going to say. We go to these places, 3 people will speak over and over. This is intimate enough, and you know, only your voice is going to be picked up because privacy. So get comfortable and let's talk, because I'm an artist, and in any art piece, you put up a piece, for example, you try to find yourself in it, there's an emotive response. I want to hear the emotive response.
So we've got Sean Gerald here.
Mr. Douglas, I would like to say that I am deeply appreciative of the time you have taken to come and speak to us today, as well as your nuanced takes on many ideological landscapes. So 2 questions that I have for you today are, you mentioned developing more of an intellectual capacity over emotional, and I was wondering, what advice would you give for someone who maybe wants to move from more of an emotional mindset to an intellectual one? And then the second question that I had was, when you come against, a problem or a situation in life that is unfamiliar to you, is there, I don't know, like 1 or 2 questions just initially, like that almost automatically pop up for you?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start with the second question, just because I'm old and I have to write things down. So when you're confronted with a problem, right? I'm going to answer this question from my mother, advice my mother used to give, and then I'll turn into the more intellectual part. In the Caribbean, I don't know, they used to say box your brain. That means just figure it out, right? So when you have a problem that's unfamiliar, you simply sit down and look at the problem and do the math. So in my book, in terms of the applied intelligence, I have an equation that I've written that will help you to go through a problem. So you simply, do your own little equation. Here maybe are here's the problem. Okay, you write down what the problem is, you identify the problem. And then you look at the variables that contribute to the problem, okay? And then you say to yourself, okay, I've identified the problem, I've looked at the variables that can contribute to the problem, and now how do I solve the problem? Because there's always a way to solving a problem. So my approach is do the math on it. Do the math, right? Right, Asia? Do the math, right? So if you can just think about doing the math on it, that will help you more analytically solve the problem, stay away from emotion. And how you get from intellect, listen, I'm the biggest, most emotional person. A couple guys in the room here who's played basketball with me knows, when I'm on a basketball court, I'm highly emotional. But you have to be able to identify, first of all, that's your emotion, and say, well, what is the emotion going to get me? How is the emotion going to help me solve the problem? What's the probability that this emotion, if I continue along this road, how is it going to solve the problem? And then it should answer, it's not. It might make the problem worse. So then you now have to go into your intellectual box. And the word that I came up with, applied intelligence, is you have to apply your intelligence. Like, you have to apply it. Like, you got to apply something. You can have you can have your math, but how do you apply it? So if you apply your intelligence, then you can go into problem solving. Hope that answers that question for you.
We have another question from Dwight.
Hey, yes, thanks so much, Mr. Douglas, for sharing, dropping some knowledge, I guess, on us, and really, you said so much, and it reminded me of a lot of conversations that I've had, just growing up. I mean, I feel like you're like one of my uncles, just from the way you made some of those points there.
Yeah.
But you're into AI, and I was thinking a lot of the challenges that we see right now related to, I mean, of course, everybody's talking about ChatGPT,
Yeah.
right? I don't know if McGill's finished drafting its policy on that. I guess it's evolving, but we know that the workforce of the future depends on
Yep.
us being able to correctly
I'm finding something on it, that's why I'm not ignoring.
Oh,
Go ahead,
yeah,
I'm
go
gonna
for it.
find something. Go ahead.
we need to be able to not shy away from that technology. We still need to be able to utilize it. And my question for you is, looking at artificial intelligence and the role of HI, human intelligence, where do we fit? Because you're talking about looking at things from an analytical perspective, utilizing our intelligence, but social and emotional skills are key, and we really need to be able to connect that innate human emotion to that technology in order to really make the most of it. So my question is just how would you define that process, and what would you recommend for some of the students here to develop themselves for future challenges in the workforce?
So I think the premise of your question, you're right. What you're saying is correct. So there's a lot of hype around. I'm in the business, data science, artificial intelligence, and I use that as an augmenting tool, right, to make things faster, more efficient, to be more precise. It's not going to replace. So the reason why I wanted to pull this up. So a friend of mine in California, who runs a tech firm. There was a conference this weekend, and the founder was Stanford professor, one of the creators of the AI and the internet and all that. These are the older guys, and they were saying, ChatGPT, for example, makes shit up. Okay, but people don't know any better, so they don't know what they're reading, and ChatGPT, a lot of it is wrong, and they can't use it. Okay. So, for example, Microsoft rushed out to put their AI in Bing, and they only gave it to a few people. So I was listening to a podcast on the way here from a New York Times writer, and then he was one of the people that Microsoft allowed to show the Bing. So he had a 3-hour conversation with Bing. And at the end of the day, no word of a lie, Bing was the computer was telling him that he loves him, and this and that, and it's just weird, crazy stuff. Because it's just a predictor. It's a predictor of words and things, and based on the data sets that's put in. Look, AI is data, and the amount of data that you have will allow you to, is the power of AI. So directly to your question, it's not going to replace anybody. I'm in the business, so what has to happen is this. It's people who don't know, and they don't take enough time to look through it. So what it is, it's just going to be like every other technology in the past. Now, it's really, really powerful, and it's going to be useful, but what happens is that it's not cognitive. It can't think. It can't see the landscape. It can't read the room, right? And I keep giving people this example. OpenAI can do paintings and all that stuff. It can't paint a Van Gogh, right? Because it's not human. Right? So the point is, it could paint something, but it can't never be a Van Gogh, because a Van Gogh is a human being. Because if it paints something that looks beautiful, the beauty is part of the emotion of the painter and everything. And if it paints something that's beautiful, it's not worth anything, because anybody can do it. The beauty of art is that everybody can do it, and it's original. So what I'm saying here is that don't be freaked out about OpenAI and all these type of things. Humans will be needed. And I'm going to tell you this, okay? For the art students in the room here, okay, your future is bright, because I cover something called content creator. In the future, the people who are going to be of more value are the ones who can create content. Let me give you an example. I had a young guy, PhD, just went to UFT, data science, young guy, finished his PhD, came to work for me. and like he wants to get paid the stupid money. I'm like, no, your PhD is wonderful, but the machine can do it, right? So now, what has happened for him in this thing, algorithms are writing algorithms. So what do I need you for? So you want this big salary? Well, why am I going to give you a big salary? Because you know what, the machine can do it. And I've learned a lot, even in the simple things of doing presentations. I've been able to, I'm not the, my kids bother me all the time. I'm in technology, I don't know how to use it. But even me have been able to do great presentations, do a whole bunch of things using some simple AI programs or whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, okay, humans still gonna have to make the executive decision, no matter what. I'll give you some data to back that up. The World Economic Forum just did a study that more and more corporations are hiring students who graduate in the arts, okay? Because they're better problem solver, problems, they have open minds, they're not stressed, okay? And they're more compassionate, they have more empathy, and they're better thinkers than the people, the business schools and all that kind of stuff. So more and more people. Look, when I graduated from McGill, political science and history, and I went to Toronto to Bay Street, and I applied to be in the investment business. They did this test or whatnot, and it was the investment business. I didn't have any type of degrees, but the guy looked at me. First of all, he said, "Oh, okay, you went to McGill. We can teach you, right?" That's what he said. So the McGill degree was just for me to get in the damn door. So use it for that, guys. Right? So what I'm saying is that people in the arts are they can learn better, because when you are in science, sometimes you're stuck in silos. And one of the great books I've read is called Range: Why Generalists Do It Better. Because when you have an open mind, you can attack problems. People who solve some of the biggest problems in the world are generalists. Okay? I'm not talking about cancer research and all that kind of stuff. What I'm talking about is a lot of social problems, business problems, right? So the thing about it is that there's a professor at MIT, Professor Richardson. I use a lot of her work. She's a black professor, dynamite, and she basically came up with the word with the augmented mind, the outsourcing of the mind. All that meant is that we just use data science and AI to do the mundane things that we don't want to do. But at the end of the day, once you gather that, you're going to have to add some insight. So in my business, we talk about using insight. So I use insight to create strategy for businesses. So long story short, humans are not going anywhere. And people who are now content creators and who can create the content, who can be entrepreneurial, you're going to have better value than the more specific science, business school people, because the machine can do their jobs, right? The thinkers, the creators, the machine can't do that, right?
I think we have one last question.
Thank you. Sorry, actually I have two questions.
Sure.
My first question is, I really liked your point on using history as data. And actually, a lot of what you said reminded me of the work of Ray Dalio, the previous...
That's my guy.
That's your guy.
That's my guy, Ray Dalio, smartest man in the universe.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast on what he was saying the other day, and I was wondering, maybe linking into that, what your thoughts were on using history as data and like Asia in general, because that's like a really good region if you want to look at maybe like 5,000, they say 5,000 years of history back.
Yeah.
And then my second question would be, when you spoke about Angela Davis, Toni Morrison, and then on the other end, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and I would maybe add to that pool Patrice Lumumba from the country that I'm from.
Patrick Lumumba, oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Oh man, this guy is actually, I just sent something to my wife today. I was like, I emailed her something from Patrick Lumumba. Okay, remember, I gotta write this. Patrick Lumumba, where are you from? Kenya?
From Congo.
Congo, oh, he's brilliant.
Yeah, so I would maybe add to that pool Patrice Lumumba, and I was wondering if you thought that there was any merit to that sort of figure in the Black history world, because what I got from what you were saying was that there's more maybe applied intelligence to the work of Toni Morrison and Angela Davis because they were able to survive. If you looked at those other figures, they were attacked by
Yeah.
the Western nations and Patrick
Yes.
Lumumba, he was like
Yes.
destroyed basically. So
Yes.
I'm wondering if
Yes.
you, because for example, I learned about Martin Luther King when I was 6 years old, but Toni Morrison, I only heard about her when I started studying literature a little bit. So maybe
Yeah.
if you could speak on that.
Yeah, so your first question, history is the most important thing. History is data, right? But you know, you have to be aware of history because history is often written by the conquerors. So you have to be a good reader of history, and you got to understand history stuff and just don't take anybody's word for it. One of the guys I kind of try to crush in the book is Niles Ferguson. He's an intellectual, but he's a conservative. He's not a historian. He's just a right wing. But he hides behind scholarship, right? But anyways, your point is this. History is the most important thing because if you don't know history, you don't have any evidence, you don't have anything to judge from. And one of the things I've said is that history is such an important thing for me. One of my partners called me a history tech guy. I didn't know what that means, but history is so important. But your second question with Angela Davis and Toni Morrison and all that, here's why. Human beings are lazy. And we read, one of the guys I read is Uriel, he wrote the book Sapiens. He's an Israeli, Yuval, what's his name again? I can't pronounce it. But anyways, I have all his books I read. He says human beings survive on stories. Okay, we listen to stories, we like stories, and then we're lazy and we don't want to go into the intellectual exercise. So Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, they're fine, don't get me wrong, right? To say criticize them. No, I'm not criticizing. Those guys have made their play with history. But it was all emotional, and we were driven in a way from a civil rights perspective on pure emotion. But were we really getting anything done? If you read Toni Morrison's, she broke it down for you intellectually and challenged you to, this is what you have to do. But guess what? The intellectual part is hard. So we don't do it. So we fall to the stories and we allow ourselves. So you have to really do the hard thinking and the hard work, and you can't be lazy. So that's what I'm saying.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're sticking around until they throw us out. Last time I was here about 4 years ago, I said, well, God bless Black History Month. We come in at this building to wake up some dopey and frighten them, right? So we're not leaving till we finish the food, drink up the juice, and talk to each other. Because the truth is, some people are not going to stand up publicly and ask a question. And the whole point of this was spit knowledge this way, but we want you to spit knowledge back this way too. Thank you very much. We forgot to do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge them. However, the 1st of February, part of that was the African enslaved acknowledgement. And so I invoke those two acknowledgements and all protocols observed. Please get home as safe as you got here. Hashtag applied intelligence. Tell 2 friends what you learn up in here. They will tell 2 friends, and so on, and so on, and so on.
And before you finish, I always have to be a salesman. You can go to my website, douglasblackwell.net. It's my corporate website, but there's a section called publications, and you can send me a note. And when my book is going to be released in March, there'll be a book signing actually back here in Montreal, and it'll be available on all platforms, Amazon and all that. So send me a note, and I'll make sure I'll let you know when it's released.
Yeah, and I want to thank Kavisha, Irene, Christian, and the whole University Advancement and McGill Black alumni team. Thank you, our contributors, Kathleen Moore, and of course, man of the hour, Perry Douglas. So join us in a round of applause for these great speakers. So help yourself to refreshments. Don't forget to pre-order the copy of the book, and have a great evening. Thanks for coming.